Spring practice is all about developing players, but at the same time, maybe the number one goal is just to keep everyone healthy and make it on through the 15 sessions. Unable to do that at Georgia with their number one receiver, George Pickens, suffering an ACL tear on Tuesday. He will require surgery. Let's get more information here from Palmer Toms from Dogs 247 Sports. Palmer, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's been a busy day covering this breaking news. We received word of it about around midday with the official release coming from Georgia right at noon. Football SID Claude Felton sent out the email with, word that George Pickens suffered a non-contact injury on Tuesday in Georgia's fourth practice of spring drills, torn ACL, and something that'll require surgery. He's already started his pre-op rehab process with the UGA sports medicine staff, Ron Corson, who stays busy over there with all the injuries that Georgia's had over the last couple of seasons. But it's certainly a tough blow for Georgia, and you hate it to see a kid like that. George Pickens, someone who really does enjoy going out playing football. Looks to have a bright future for himself. Playing professionally. You hate to see it for a kid like that. The good news, and this came from Kirby Smart, he said, the good news is that the MRI that they, got this morning showed that it was an isolated injury. So no other structures were involved, just the ACL, which, obviously is something that you like to hear when a player suffers a knee injury, that it's not, dipping into the MCL, meniscus, other areas of the knee.
Based on ACL injuries and then the aftermath of the rehab after surgery, it seems to put George Pickens in a timetable of possibly being able to come back late in the season. It seems to take 8, 9 to 10 months, something in that range.
Yeah, if you look around college football, ACLs, it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of, how long it's going to take. You look at recent surgeries that have been done, and the timeline seems to have sped up some. Amari Rogers is the name that comes to mind. The Clemson receiver suffered a injury like this on March 25th, 2019, and was back on the field for week 2 against Texas A&M. You look at the year before that, Auburn had a pair of wide receivers that went down with a torn ACL as well. Will Hastings and Eli Stove, those two were back within 6 months. So, I think the fact that this was isolated just to the ACL, that's got to be a good sign in terms of, getting this process sped up. But, like you said, the normal timeline, for an ACL injury is somewhere between 8 to 10 months. So you kind of look at that 9-month range as an estimate. That would put him back in December, would be late season. And at that point, you got to wonder what's going through his head. Does he want to rush it back and, play in some late season football? It obviously depends on what kind of football, what the stakes are at that point for Georgia, whether they're playing SEC championship, college football playoffs, or, if it's just a, normal bowl game, big, New Year's Six bowl game, you don't expect a kid like that to rush back to, get on the field and maybe jeopardize his future. My guess is that we probably won't see him play another snap at Georgia. He's a guy that's, one of the top receivers in this 2022 NFL draft class already. And I think that more than likely he's not going to rush the process and really focus on getting healthy ahead of the NFL draft and preparing for his professional career.
And that's too bad for Georgia fans in seeing what could possibly have happened here, because you've got a 5-star that comes onto campus, leads the team in receiving as a true freshman, 49 catches. Then he comes back in 2020, gets off to a slow start, but once they fix the quarterback situation, get JT Daniels in play, he catches, out of his 36 receptions, catches 23 in 4 games with almost all of his touchdowns with JT Daniels at quarterback. A lot of good words out there, and you would be able to expound upon this far more than I can about the testament to his hard work during the offseason, how much he matured and was growing as a player. You combine that again with his talent with JT Daniels throwing the football downfield, and who knows what the season could have looked like for him this year.
Yeah, I mean, you bring it up right there with JT Daniels and the impact that he had on George Pickens, and the connection was there. You saw those two, really bond. I think you talked to Daniels after that, after his first start against Mississippi State. He was like, I feel confident throwing it up to George. I know that George is a guy that I can throw it up to, and 99% of the time he's going to come down with it. Pickens had his two biggest games of the season in the last two outings against Missouri and Cincinnati, went over 100 yards in both of those contests. And like you said, finished as the leading receiver his freshman year, essentially finished as the leading receiver his sophomore year as well, had the same number of receptions as Kearis Jackson. Both those guys had 36 receptions. Kearis had 514 yards. George had 513. But the real edge there was that Pickens brought in 6 touchdowns to Jackson's 3, and the fact that Pickens only played in 8 games, so his average was higher as well. So you definitely looked at him as the best receiver on this Georgia team the last 2 years, and going in, and one of the best receivers in college football going into his 3rd year. I think that expectations certainly were high for him and for this Georgia offense as a whole. I mentioned to you before we came on the air, but Kirby Smart said this Georgia offense is light years ahead of where they were last year. I think that's a combination of the experience factor of Daniels. A year ago he wasn't even in the transfer portal. He had no clue that he was going to end up at Georgia. Wasn't working with Todd Monken. That's another person who's around for a second year. This offense was just getting more and more and more comfortable, and George Pickens was absolutely going to be a big part of that. Whether it was, him getting the ball or him drawing attention away from Georgia's other receivers. And now, you look at those other guys that I'm sure we'll bring up here in a couple minutes, but, the attention is going to be on those guys, whereas they would have been a secondary option, in terms of the defense's attention and focus. Pickens was drawing double teams, and that opened things up for Kearis Jackson, who had some big games early on in the season. It opened things up for a young guy like Jermaine Burton, who developed and came along and is, likely going to be filling, one of those outside receiver roles that Pickens is leaving behind.
George Pickens goes down with an ACL in practice due to a non-contact drill on a Tuesday. We got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports to help us break that down. And then moving forward, obviously, it's who gets the targets. You mentioned Kearis Jackson, who tied for the team lead, as you mentioned, again, 36 catches. Jermaine Burton's a guy that caught 27 last year. Tight ends are coming back, a couple of them. There are players who were injured last year who were highly sought after and highly recruited. How does this shake out, do you think, in regards to filling that void?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to fill that void with one player. George Pickens, like we said, is one of the top receivers in college football, and it's going to be hard to replace his production with just one person. I think if you were to target, circle one person as the possible replacement there, it would be Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, who was a true freshman last year, played in 6 games, only caught 4 passes for 62 yards and had 1 touchdown. That touchdown came on the last play of his season, suffered a lower leg injury, broken ankle against Florida. So he's going to be coming back from injury himself. But, just in terms of the size, he's probably the one that would fit that mold the best. But like I said, I don't think this is something where one guy is replacing, all of Georgia's production. And I think, like we mentioned, Kearis Jackson, Jermaine Burton, the tight ends, Darnell Washington, they bring back, John Fitzpatrick at that position as well. They bring in Brock Bowers, who's a talented tight end. And then the name that, really comes to mind as someone that didn't play a huge role last year, but can play an even bigger role this year is Arian Smith. He had 2 catches last year. One of those went for a touchdown. His first career reception went for a touchdown against South Carolina, had a big reception in the Peach Bowl against Cincinnati. Both of those were, long, deep balls. He's a speedy option that can be put on the outside, can be put on the inside. I think it's just a matter of who's healthy, who you're going to have on the outside versus in the slot. And that's going to really affect who's on the field. Another name that comes to mind and someone else that's going to be coming back from injury, and if you look at the 2020 stats, he's not on there, is Dominic Blaylock. He suffered a torn ACL of his own in the 2019 SEC championship game against LSU. Was on track to return from that, and then unfortunately re-tore that same ACL in fall camp last year, back in August. He's a guy that's going to factor in if he's healthy. And that's a big if, because, anytime you've got someone that's returning from 2 torn ACLs, obviously the same knee, which is different than Zamir White, who tore 2 ACLs and did it in both knees. But it takes time to get back and recover from that kind of injury. But when he was healthy, you look back at his freshman season, 12 games played, 18 catches, 310 yards, 5 touchdowns, finished second on the team in trips to the end zone. I think, he can certainly be a big factor for Georgia. You're able to put him in the slot, which opens things up for moving Kearis Jackson to the outside, having Arian Smith on the outside as well. Jermaine Burton's a player that will play on the outside. It's just a matter of, can you get Blaylock healthy so that you can open things up for the other guys like Burton, Jackson, and down on the line.
Georgia fans, we've got a free mask available for you. Just go to voiceofcollegefootball.com. You register for free. Right there at the top of the page, you'll see on the menu bar, register for free. That's what you do right there. You get your free face mask. We've got about 35 teams available, including Georgia. And then you just designate what team you would like. You get your coupon code. You get 20% off your first purchase as well, in addition to the free mask. You don't have to buy anything, but you get 20% off, and also in a $25 gift card entry. Got Palmer Tom's on the line talking up the Georgia Bulldogs, of course, with the Dogs in spring practice. Looking at the rest of the team and what's been accomplished thus far, it's only been 3 or 4 practices, but there's been talk from Kirby Smart. And this is typically the talk for most college football teams. It's your time to experiment. Maybe we've got a really talented kid, but he's stacked behind 4 other players at that position. Why don't we try him here or try him there? You've got a couple examples of that.
Yeah, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, where Georgia is replacing so much. You go watch the pro day from last Wednesday, and it was all defensive guys, with the exception of with the exception of a couple offensive linemen, and Trey McKitty was there as well. He didn't participate, but he's gone from the tight end room. But majority of the losses that you saw on the offensive side of the ball were on the line rather than skill positions. Whereas you look at defense, and you've got guys that were playing big roles for Georgia last year. Those spots need to be filled, and in order to do so, you gotta experiment some. So I think the names that I mentioned to you were Adam Anderson and Lavosia Carroll. I'll start with Anderson because he's more established in the role that he's had. He's been a great pass rusher for Georgia the last couple of seasons. Has really played in that outside linebacker role well for the Bulldogs, and is expected to take on a bigger role in doing so this year, because you look at the guys that they lose Jermaine Johnson and Azeez Ojulari at that position. Georgia's going to be counting on Dan Lanning, defensive coordinator, outside linebackers coach as well, is going to be counting on guys like Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith to step up and take bigger roles. But the interesting part about what we've heard about Adam Anderson so far is that Kirby Smart told us he's been practicing at star. And for those that don't necessarily know, the star position in Georgia's defense is essentially a 5th defensive back. And, they use it really heavily in, passing situations, third down situations, where they want to have more defensive backs on the field. But typically that star is on the field for first and second down, just playing more of a run support role. Well, in the past, it's been more of a defensive back kind of guy. The last 2 years, it's been Tyreek Stevenson and Mark Webb, who are more safety cornerback type guys. Well, Adam Anderson is outside linebacker, and he's been playing, practicing at star. It's something that Kirby Smart said they probably wouldn't be doing if they had a game coming up. But like we said, spring practice is all about experimenting and, getting him those reps, dropping back into pass coverage. They know what he can do in run support. And because that job, that star position, has to take on responsibility in run support and pass protection. That's something that they're very, looking into very heavily. The other one that I mentioned, like I said, Lavosia Carroll, he was is a true freshman running back, 4-star signee, an early enrollee with the Bulldogs. He's practicing at cornerback, where a position where Georgia, Kirby Smart said, we're willing to try anybody and everybody at corner. We've seen videos of Lewis Seen, who was a safety last year, started all 10 games for Georgia at safety. He's been, working at corner, getting reps in press coverage type situations. In terms of Carroll, his situation is more of he's played defensive back in high school. He was recruited to Georgia as a running back, but you look at that running back room, they bring back Zamir White, they bring back James Cook. Those are two guys that have the option to go to the NFL, but decided to come back. They bring back Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards as well. So that's 5 running backs that, have established themselves. Every single carry that Georgia had last season is back. I think those guys have established themselves in terms of their roles, and it was really going to be a challenge for Carroll to, pass any of them on the depth chart and get carries. And even if he did, it was going to be in late game scenarios where, he may not be gaining all that much of the experience from it. Rather than just practicing at running back, Georgia's opting to try him at cornerback where they've got some depth issues. Plenty of spots open with the loss of Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, DJ Daniels. Like I mentioned, the 2 guys that played star, Stevenson and Webb, they've got a lot of holes to fill in the secondary. And they think Carroll has, some of the traits that some of those guys that left have, and they're willing to give it a shot. Let him practice at corner this spring, develop himself, make a name for himself at corner. And either A, he's earns a position there and he's got a role carved out for him, or B, he moves back over to offense and is able to slide right back in at running back once Zamir White and James Cook head to the NFL after their final season here in Athens.
There you've got it. Georgia continues spring football practice without George Pickens. We got Palmer Thomas on the line from Dogs 247 Sports. You know the name brand, you know the quality there. So please head on over to Dogs 247 to check out Palmer's work right there. Palmer, we appreciate you stopping by as always, getting us set on the George Pickens news. And of course, you're welcome back anytime, that, to update us on Georgia football.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for having me on.